Good afternoon, and thank you for joining our briefing on the City of Philadelphia's response to gun violence. This briefing is for press only. If you are not a member of the press, please log out and watch today's live stream on the City of Philadelphia's Facebook page or tune in to 900 AM or 96.1 FM WURD. We will begin our briefing with remarks by Mayor Jim Kenney. Mayor, you have the floor.
Thanks, Kevin. Good afternoon, everybody. There are a few updates we'd like to share today as we continue working at all levels to address gun violence across our city. First, just a few minutes ago, Police Commissioner Daniel Outlaw and city officials Vanessa Garrett-Harley and Erica Atwood participated in an update on the Community Violence Intervention Collaborative spearheaded by the White House. At this virtual meeting, we heard from leaders in the Biden administration regarding civics progress to date, and we shared progress on our own initiatives about how Philadelphia is fighting back against gun violence, including updates on our group violence initiative, PPD's Operation Pinpoint, and other programs laid out on our roadmap for a safer community. We also heard from leaders in several other cities participating in the collaborative, all of whom have been experiencing similar challenges regarding violence in their own communities, including Chicago, Baton Rouge, Detroit, and Baltimore. We look forward to continuing our work with the collaborative, which supports cities and grassroots organizations across all 16 jurisdictions involved, as we prioritize and identify community-based public safety and public health strategies to address gun violence. And we are very grateful to the Biden-Harris administration for providing leadership and support on such a critical issue where lives are at stake each and every day. Also last week, Every Town for Gun Safety Support Fund, in partnership with the Community Justice Action Fund, announced the launch of the Gov Grant Navigator, a new resource designed to help nonprofits, state and local governments, hospitals, school districts, researchers, and more navigate the complex federal grant landscape. As cities across the country, including here in Philadelphia, continue to do everything possible to address the epidemic of gun violence that is devastating our communities, the organization and institutions working to fight back against it deserve every resource they can get. So while we're doing what we can at the local level, investing heavily in anti-violence initiatives that both address the immediate crisis and tackle the systemic root causes of violence, this new resource will help get even more funding from the federal level into the hands of organizations that need it to save lives. Lastly, I want to highlight just how much our hands locally are tied when it comes to enacting and enforcing laws addressing gun violence. Early this week, a court ruling struck down a Philadelphia ordinance that requires gun owners to tell police when a firearm has been lost and stolen. Oh my God, what a big burden. This is deeply disappointing. We completely agree with the sentiment raised by Judge Ledbetter in her concurrence in the ruling, where she noticed that gun violence experienced in Philadelphia justifies stronger gun safety laws than may be necessary statewide, and that we should not deny basic safety to our residents when they are desperately in need of it. We strongly agree and hope the Pennsylvania Supreme Court will hear our appeal. We will continue to fight for the right to enact and enforce stronger gun laws to protect our people and save lives. Now I'll turn it over to Erica Atwood, Senior Director, Office of Policy and Strategic Initiatives for Criminal Justice and Public Safety, for additional updates. I'm sorry, Erica is still in the meeting with the White House, so I'll turn it over to Commissioner Outlaw.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon, everyone. Before I get started, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the bravery of our members of our SWAT unit and the SWAT officer that was shot this past Friday while attempting to serve a high-risk warrant. As you now know, members of the Philadelphia Police Department's Gun Violence Task Force and SWAT were on location to serve a warrant in the 100 block of West Lehigh Avenue when an offender opened fire through a wall, striking our officer in the chest. Thankfully, this officer was wearing a bulletproof vest and was not seriously injured. That offender is now charged with attempted murder, aggravated assault on a law enforcement officer, recklessly endangering another person, possessing an instrument of crime, violation of the Uniform Firearms Act, and possession with the intent to deliver. This specific individual has an extensive criminal history and is known to law enforcement. He's a dangerous individual, someone who is a danger to society and to law enforcement personnel. I was glad to see that his bail was set at $3.5 million. And just 2 days before this incident, two of our plainclothes officers were in the 4800 block of Kaiser Street when they drove directly into a gun battle, and one of the offenders turned his gun on our officers. Thankfully, The officers in this incident also escaped injury as well. And then just yesterday, 17th District officers responded to a report of a person with a weapon in the 2000 block of Beechwood Street. When the officers arrived, they came upon a male armed with a knife who was actively stabbing a family member. The officers deployed their tasers, which were ineffective, and then ultimately fired shots at the attacker as he continued to stab the victim. Unfortunately, the victim, a 72-year-old woman, succumbed to her injuries, as did the offender. Thankfully, these officers also escaped injury, but the fact that we have seen 6 officer-involved shootings this year speaks to the type of dangers that people out on the streets of Philadelphia, not just our police officers, are facing each and every day. Case in point, around the same time this was happening, on opposite ends of the city, the lives of one young girl and one young woman were also completely changed by violence. The young girl, a 12-year-old, was shot in a drive-by shooting as she was walking home from school in the 4600 block of D Street. She was shot in the side, and thank God she's in stable condition. And while officers were responding to that incident, another gunshot victim, a 29-year-old woman, arrived at Temple Hospital, where she is also in stable condition. I'm sharing all of this to say that we recognize that there are far too many people out there who aren't feeling safe in our communities. We hear you, I hear you, and I assure you that this police department is doing everything that we can with the resources that we have to fix this. This leads me into another issue that's been ongoing with the police department, one of police response times. Since 2020, the Philadelphia Police Department, like many other organizations, has been grappling with COVID, burnout, and decreased staffing. Some police procedures changed in the wake of the events in the summer of 2020. And here in Philadelphia, one of the noted impacts that led to increased times on incoming 911 calls was our adoption of the mental health script that is read at the onset of all calls to 911. This script was developed in the interest of public safety to ensure that those experiencing a mental health event were provided with the appropriate response. It's easy to surmise that if it takes longer to get through a call, that it will also take longer to respond to other incoming calls once there are more calls than available call takers to answer them. And then on top of that, if there is an overall decreased staffing, whether in the 911 dispatch center or officers on patrol, there are likely going to be longer response times. But we also know that staffing is not the only factor that's contributing to these increased wait times. We know that generally there was a significant increase in violent crime in the city, and violent crimes take longer to process, taking our officers out of service longer. That means that there's less officers available in that moment to pick up lower priority calls. Let me be clear though. I want our community to know when they say that their reason for calling the police is important to them, it's important to us as well. It most certainly is. Please understand that we do care about your issue and we will get there as soon as we possibly can. We're also working on other ways to report incidents that won't require a police response. But in the meantime, please know we've added 50 new dispatchers since December to police radio, which is helping with the 911 call taking. Another class is expected to begin this week with approximately 25 dispatchers ready to be trained. With the police radio staffing numbers being filled, we are hopeful that we will be closing the gap on our radio staffing deficit in the near future. In addition to our dispatchers, like many other police departments across the nation, we're also facing a shortage of police officers amongst our ranks. The shortage is significant. Our officer is down over 600 police officers from our staffing levels in 2015. And while we continue to put provisions in place to mitigate these concerns, the reality is that we simply need more new police officers to fill these openings. As you will hear shortly from Deputy Commissioner Ben Nash, Deputy Commissioner of Investigations, that despite these challenges, our officers are making a number of outstanding arrests in the fight against those who seem to bring harm to our communities. We're doing what we can with what we have, but more can be done. And perhaps you would consider a chance at a career where you can make a real difference. Our next application period is set to open next month on March 1st, and we encourage anyone interested in applying to call 215-683-COPS or 215-683-2677, or go to our recruitment website at www.joinphillypd.com for more information on how to become a police officer. Now to talk about what's going on in our Pinpoint locations is Deputy Commissioner Joel Dales, who is our Deputy Commissioner over Patrol. He'll be followed by Deputy Commissioner Nash, Deputy Commissioner over Investigations, who will then provide updates on what we have going on in the realm of investigations. DC Dales.
Thank you, Commissioner. Can you pull up the slides, please? All right, next slide. All right, I will start with the citywide homicide and shooting victim stats. Looking at the top of the chart year to date as of February 13th of this year, Philadelphia has 62 homicides and 249 shooting victims. In comparison to last year, homicides are down 6%, 62 this year versus 66 last year, and shooting victims are up 1%, 249 this year versus 246 last year. And looking at the bottom left of the chart, it shows the motives for the homicides. The top three motives are arguments, domestics, which are down 67% year to date, and drugs. Next slide, please. Looking at the top of the chart, it shows citywide homicides down 29% and citywide shooting victims down 32% when comparing the current 4-week period from January 17th to February 13th with the previous 4-week period from December 20th to January 16th. And looking at the bottom of the chart, it shows homicides down 45% and shooting victims down 52% in the Pinpoint grids when comparing the current 4-week period with the previous 4-week period. Next slide, please. This slide shows the comparison between citywide homicides and homicides that occurred in the Pinpoint grids. If you look at the top of the chart, it shows citywide homicides down 6%. Looking at the bottom of the chart, it shows homicides in the Pinpoint grids up 33%, 24 this year versus 18 last year. Next slide, please. This slide shows the comparison between citywide shooting victims and shooting victims in the Pinpoint grids. Citywide shooting victims are up 1% and the Pinpoint grids are up 2%, 87 this year versus 85 last year. Next slide, please. All right, this slide shows the year-end total roof arrests for 2018 through 2021 and the total roof arrests year to date for 2022. From January 1st to February 13th. In 2021, we reached an all-time high, as I keep mentioning every 2 weeks, for roof arrests that totaled 2,541. And so far this year, we have made 305 roof arrests. This time last year, we had 459 roof arrests and 199 roof arrests in 2020, which shows an increase in roof arrests by 53% when comparing 2022 year-to-date totals with 2020. And a decrease in roof arrests by 34% when comparing 2022 year-to-date totals with 2021. Next slide, please. In 2021, we recovered 962 crime guns by the end of February. And if you look at the bar graph above 2021, it shows the orange and the red boxes. You add those two together, you'll get 962, and that's based on the end of February. So as of February 14th of this year, 722 crime guns are recovered in our city. If we continue at this rate, we will reach a total of 5,856 by the end of the year, which is a little less than the total crime guns recovered in 2021, which again was 5,907. Next slide, please. All right, lastly, in reference to the privately made firearms, also known as ghost guns, that were recovered in our city as of February 14th of this year, we are now at 55. So with that, I will now turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Ben Nash, who is the Deputy Commissioner of Control Investigations, and he will speak about cases we wish to highlight.
Thank you, Deputy Dales. Good afternoon, everyone. And as Commissioner Outlaw mentioned, I have a lot of updates because there is a lot of good work that has been done by our police officers and our investigators. So as I do for each press conference, I'm going to go over the arrest as well as wanted. I'll also, because it's such a hot topic, I'll be touching on the carjackings. We've had a lot of carjacking arrests in the last 2 weeks. We have arrested 7 individuals wanted for committing homicides. And as I said, I'll also be talking about our fugitives. So if we can start these slides, Kevin. Thank you. We can go to the next one. And the following are going to be slides of individuals recently arrested for homicides. I'm going to be listing the incidents chronologically by date of occurrence from the earliest to the most recent, with an incident that starting with an incident that occurred in 2021. And this is Joel Reyes. On February the 10th, 24-year-old Joel Reyes was arrested for the murder of 47-year-old Raymond Ebron that occurred on March 25th of 2021 on the 700 block of East Allegheny Avenue. Joel Reyes was initially arrested on April the 29th of 2021 for the aggravated assault of Mr. Ebron, where he struck the victim several times with a pipe or a stick. Unfortunately, the victim from that incident succumbed to his injuries months later, and the homicide unit was assigned to the case after the victim's death, obtained an arrest warrant for Mr. Reyes on January the 18th and charging him with murder. The motive for this homicide, we do not know. Next slide is Damon Baker. On February 14th, 49-year-old Damon Baker was arrested for a double shooting murder of his girlfriend, 41-year-old Felicia Parks, and 31-year-old Jameer Saunders. It occurred on June 8th, 2021 on the 1700 block of North 27th Street. And it appears that this incident stemmed from an argument. Next will be Dion Ferguson. On February 3rd, the United States Marshals Violent Crime Fugitive Task Force arrested 24-year-old Dion Ferguson for the shooting murder of 29-year-old Lavon Colbreth for an incident that occurred on November 23rd of 2021 and happened on the 2200 block of South 62nd Street. Of note, I previously featured Mr. Ferguson during a press conference back in December when the arrest warrant was obtained. And we are grateful for the assistance from the Marshal Service. Next slide will be pictures of, we don't have a picture, but I can tell you that we have a 12-year-old that was arrested, Mr. Khalid Morales, and we have a wanted of Qiyam Muhammad. And on February the 3rd, 12-year-old Khalid Morales was arrested for the brutal murder of 70-year-old Chun Chin. He was beaten to death on December the 2nd, 2021 on the 3000 block of Teasdale Avenue. The mugshot will be available upon request from Public Affairs. Case was previously cleared with the arrest of John Newsland on January the 14th. In addition, investigators obtained an arrest warrant, and you see him on the screen, 16-year-old Qiyam Muhammad. They obtained the arrest warrant on February 4th in reference to this case, so he is still wanted. Next is an arrest photo of Joseph Wayne. February 8th, 23-year-old Joseph Wayne was arrested for the shooting murder of 29-year-old Willie Walker, occurred on December the 3rd, 1700 block of West Passyunk Avenue. And again, I spoke about Mr. Wayne's arrest warrant during a previous press conference on January the 19th, and the motive for this homicide was believed to be an argument. Next is Ryan Beck. On February 4th, 22-year-old Ryan Beck was arrested for the stabbing murder of 35-year-old Nicholas Rowan for an incident that occurred on December the 12th on the 6600 block of Charles Street. The motive for this incident appears to be robbery. Next is Michael Colgan. And on February the 2nd, 29-year-old Michael Colgan was arrested for the murder of 40-year-old Jason Panis and the assault of another victim who survived for an incident that occurred on January the 28th of this year on the 3200 block of Cedar Street. Michael Colgan aggressively ran over the victims with his vehicle, backed up, struck the victim again, killing Mr. Panis. This incident appears to have stemmed from an argument between the offender and one of the victims. Next, I'm going to be featuring individuals wanted for recent homicides. We have a picture of Parrish Barnes. 53-year-old Parrish Barnes is wanted for shooting and killing 36-year-old Carrie Shiver that occurred on December 28th, 2021 on the 2900 block of West Fletcher Street. The warrant was obtained on February the 4th. Next is Khalil Tyree. 29-year-old Khalil Tyree is wanted for shooting and killing 41-year-old Eric Locke for an incident that occurred on January 6th of this year on the 800 block of Scattergood Street in the Northeast. The arrest warrant was obtained on February the 10th, and we believe this incident to stem from an argument. Next is Elijah Parilla. 21-year-old Elijah Parilla is wanted for shooting and killing 23-year-old Jimmy Rodriguez for an incident that occurred on January 23rd of this year on the 4500 block of North 7th Street. The arrest warrant was obtained on February the 3rd. Next is a photo of Anthony Caruso. 24-year-old Anthony Caruso wanted for shooting and killing 29-year-old Michael DeLeo, incident that occurred on February 6th, the 2500 block of Welsh Road. The arrest warrant was obtained on February the 11th. This incident appears to have stemmed from a prior argument between the victim and the offender. And in addition, on the next, we don't have it. We had, I'm sorry, I stand corrected. The last picture of Anthony Caruso, the U.S. Marshal Service actually arrested Mr. Caruso just this morning, and we are grateful for their assistance. All right, now I will be highlighting a number of recent carjacking arrests. We have the first one we'll be talking about is from 3000 block of Cumberland Street. And on January 26th, complainant was approached by 3 males while parking his vehicle at that location. One of the males was armed with a handgun, pointed at the complainant, took his keys and demanded his keys and his belongings, and they fled in his Toyota Camry. And the following day, at 12:05 on January 27th, officers in the 39th District conducted an investigation on the Toyota Camry at a New Jersey tag, came back in stolen status. When the officers approached the vehicle, they fled. And during the foot pursuit, officers observed male stop. They ducked down and reemerged. We apprehended 2 males. The officers went back to the location and where the offenders had ducked down, recovered a black 9mm handgun loaded with 15 live rounds. The males in this case are 14 and 15 years old. At the time of the arrest, they were charged with a violation of our Uniform Firearms Act and receiving stolen property. Our Major Crimes Carjacking Task Force is continuing this investigation, and we're trying to gather more evidence to possibly see if we can have enough to charge these individuals with carjacking and related offenses. The next is an incident that occurred from 2000 Glenwood, and the incident occurred on January the 23rd. Around 9:30 in the morning, a point-of-gun carjacking 2000 Glenwood in our East Division. The vehicle that was taken was a 2016 Mercedes. And on February the 8th, complainant was notified by a friend that his car was in the area of 4200 Torresdale in the Northeast Philadelphia. Complainant called 911. Officers responded to that scene, observed the Mercedes in the parking lot of a gas station at 4800 Torresdale. When they approached, the offender fled with the vehicle, crashed into a parked car on the 4500 block of Richmond. The offender exited the vehicle, fled on foot, pursued by the officers. The Mercedes was recovered, and inside of the vehicle was a 9mm Smith & Wesson handgun, had 8 live rounds. The complainant positively identified the male who the officers arrested as the same male that had carjacked him on January the 23rd. Recovered from the area where he was apprehended, we recovered several debit and credit cards. The cards were in the name of a carjacking victim from 900 East Luzerne. It had occurred just the day before the arrest on February the 7th. That victim had his 2015 Audi taken in a carjacking, and officers discovered that Audi that was taken from 900 Luzerne parked in the rear of the offender's address. We're continuing to investigate the offender for the 900 Luzerne. The offender is 32 years old in this case. Next slide for 7700 Bradford. And in this incident on February 10th at 8 o'clock, 2nd District officers responded to 7700 block of Bradford, report of a robbery in progress, met the complainant and the witness, informed the officers that they had been robbed, point of gun, the vehicle was taken. Officers observed the vehicle on the 5900 block of Elmhurst. The offender fled the vehicle. The officers apprehended him after a short foot pursuit. The complainant positively identified the suspect who had robbed him just 20 minutes earlier. This is an 18-year-old offender. He was arrested and charged with aggravated assault, robbery, carjacking, violation of Uniform Firearms Act. Next incident from an incident that stemmed from 2700 Clover in Southwest Philadelphia. And on January the 19th, complainant reported she parked a vehicle outside of that location in Southwest and began walking towards her home. An unknown offender approached and demanded at gunpoint her keys and the cell phone, took the complainant's 2019 Honda CRV, fled. And on February the 10th, officers from the 15th district observed a Honda that had, with its windshield in the back broken out, it was covered by a trash bag. Now, the officers had also seen a patrol alert indicating that a vehicle such as that they were looking at may be involved in a shooting in West Philadelphia. When they ran the tag, they found that the vehicle had been taken in the carjacking. They tried to pull the vehicle over. The driver fled the area, and eventually jumped from the vehicle in the 5400 block of Rutland. The vehicle was still moving when the operator fled on foot. Police officers pursued the offender, observed him discard an object under a parked vehicle, and arrested him on the 5500 block of Rutland. We recovered from that area a 40 caliber handgun loaded with 14 live rounds. Second offender was a passenger who also jumped from the vehicle. Other officers pursued him and apprehended him in the 5400 block of Rutland Street. He was hiding behind a vehicle. We searched the area, and a 9mm handgun loaded with 23 live rounds in an extended magazine was recovered. That firearm was in stolen status. The offenders were charged with theft and violation of the Uniform Firearms Act, as well as receiving stolen property. Our carjacking task force are continuing to work to identify the individuals from that vehicle with the carjacking that originally occurred in Southwest Philadelphia in the 2700 block of Plover, and also for possible involvement in the shooting that had occurred in West Philadelphia just 2 days prior to the arrest. The offenders in this case are 18 years old and 20 years old. Next are going to be photos of Mr. Manley and Mr. Stiles. These individuals are responsible for multiple incidents that occurred over the span of 2 days in the Northeast. And I generally don't put photos up for people that have been arrested for carjacking, but we've got these individuals have been arrested for multiple offenses. So we're able to release their identities at this point. And on February the 11th, 21-year-old Jamie Manley and 20-year-old Cameron Stiles were arrested after they were involved in an auto accident on the boulevard at Evans Street. The offenders were driving a Toyota Highlander, had been taken during a carjacking. They were subsequently connected to, and they were arrested for the carjacking that occurred just the day before, early in the morning at the Forest Hill train station on Byberry Road in the far Northeast. And in addition, they were arrested for a carjacking that occurred on the same day of this arrest on February 11th in the 7200 block of Torresdale Avenue. Additionally, Mr. Manley was identified as the offender in a commercial robbery of the Luke Oil gas station at 12,000 Roosevelt Boulevard that occurred the day prior on February the 10th. And during his arrest, officers recovered a 9mm ghost gun or privately made firearm from Mr. Stiles. Those males, we continue to investigate them for crimes in other parts of the city. And next is going to be photos of guns that were recovered on February the 13th, just earlier this week. Officers in the 14th district were in the area surveying Washington Lane and Chew Avenue. They were looking for a stolen Nissan Murano. It had been tracked to that area. The vehicle had been taken in a carjacking just about an hour prior to that in the 1700 block of North 33rd Street in North Philadelphia. They found the vehicle. It was illegally parked in the middle of the parking lot. There were males inside of it, 3 males inside. When the officers went to investigate, 3 males exited the Nissan through the driver's side of the vehicle. One officer chased 2 of the males onto Washington Lane towards Chew. They broke off from each other. But the officers were able to apprehend initially one of the males. Other officers were able to apprehend the second male on the 500 block of Maryland Street. And in the vicinity where they saw them running, the officers recovered 2 firearms. The police officers recovered a set of Volvo keys from the first male's pocket. Complainant told police during the robbery there was a red vehicle involved in that carjacking. And also in that same parking lot where the Nissan was recovered, we found a red Volvo. All the vehicles in the parking lot had been covered by snow except for the Nissan and the red Volvo. That vehicle was taken the day prior, the Volvo was. Other officers were able to chase down and apprehend the third male. They observed him toss a handgun over a fence into an apartment courtyard. The complainant came to the location, identified all three males as robbing him, pointing a gun, then identified the red Volvo as the vehicle that was present during the carjacking. All of these individuals are 14 years old. We're not going to release their names or the photos at this time. And as you're able to see on the screen, the guns that were recovered, it's 2 9mm handguns and a .45 caliber handgun. They were all fully loaded and they were all in stolen status. And finally, on February the 13th, at around 4:30 in the afternoon, 26 district officers responded to Episcopal Hospital, report of an assault. Complainants indicated they were eating in their vehicle. It was parked in the 200 block of West Dolphin Street. An offender, a Hispanic male, wearing all black, along with a leg immobilizer, walked up to the vehicle, demanded a ride. The victims refused, and the offender produced a handgun, entered the car, forced the driver to drive the vehicle. Then he pistol whipped both complainants, threatened to kill them, and he also fired several shots into the car radio and the dashboard. Took the complainant's cash, phones, and the keys, and had the victims drive him to the 3200 block of Howard Street. The offender forced the complainants out of the vehicle, pointed the gun at them, but fortunately they were not shot. The vehicle was left on the 3200 block of North Howard Street. The following day, at around a little after 2 o'clock in the afternoon, our real-time crime center, which is the hub for all of our city cameras, monitoring the cameras at Phillip and Ontario. And while monitoring those cameras, they saw a male that fit the description of the robbery walking on the 3300 block of North Phillip Street. Officers responded, stopped the male for investigation. The complainants arrived at the location and identified the male. 23-year-old offender taken into custody was charged with aggravated assault, robbery, kidnapping, and related offenses. And as the commissioner mentioned, and as you can see, our officers are really out there working hard, making a lot of arrests. Investigators are working diligently to ensure the evidence is there to support the cases and keep the violent offenders off the street. With all those arrests, we hope to see a decline in the number of carjackings in the near future. And I will now turn it back to the mayor's office, Kevin, for questions.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Nash. We will now move to Q&A for members of the press. And because of limited time, only one representative from each media outlet is permitted to ask questions. Reporters are asked to limit their questions to 2 or fewer and coordinate within their own outlets beforehand. Today, given the time and the hard deadline of 3 o'clock this afternoon, we are limiting topics to the presentations in the first round. Armando is also available for Spanish interpretation as needed. If you would like to ask a question, please use the raise your hand function under the reactions. So with that, I will move to Ross DiMattei from CBS 3.
Thank you. My question is for Commissioner Outlaw and possibly Mayor Kenny. It's about police response times and shortage of 911 dispatchers. This is something I reported on earlier this week. The Inquirer had some additional reporting that in some police districts, response times have slowed to over a half an hour. Commissioner Outlaw, I know you did a good job of addressing this issue. I'm just wondering how concerned you guys are that residents will stop calling 911 in emergency situations the longer these response times get. And what besides hiring more dispatchers and officers can be done from the city's point of view or police point of view to address this issue? Thank you.
Yep, thank you for that question. You know, we've talked about this sometime before, and we were fortunate that we were able to increase our authorized strength in our radio room so we could hire more people. So that's good news. We also recognize that we needed to look at pay, which is something that, you know, has been addressed as well. But I mean, the crux of it is, I don't think we can ignore it. The crux of it is that with increased calls for service, if we expect the same, right? It's the same thing with caseloads of our detectives. If we expect the same level of service or outputs, given that we have less people, but more work, obviously, you know, we're going to see some disparities there, and we have to prioritize the calls and how we dispatch. With all of that said, the same thing I said months ago, I'll say today, please don't hang up. residents, during the summer, I recall at least would say, I called, but it rang for X amount of time and we didn't get an answer. Someone will always answer the line. So I'm asking again, please don't hang up, because this was such a critical incident for us that was brought to our attention some time ago. We did put forth a request to hire additional dispatchers in the radio room, which we did. We were able to budget for that. We are seeing, again, like I said, we got about 50 new people in the radio room. So we've seen some improvements, but we still have to make sure that we're staffing accordingly, that we're incentivizing accordingly, because quite frankly, our radio room folks are our true first responders and they can't be forgotten about. So there have been some things put in place to mitigate. I expect that our response times will improve or continue to improve moving forward. But yes, it's very, very important to us. And it's important that people stay on the line if they believe that no one is actually going to get to them. Someone will get to them.
Thanks, Ross. You're all set? Great, thank you. We'll now go to Kelly Rule from Fox 29.
Commissioner Allo, I had similar questions and you pretty much answered it, but I was curious, in the meantime, while you're waiting for new dispatchers to come in, are you restructuring and using even patrol officers to come in and fill some of those roles? And if so, is there proper training before you allow them to go in and answer the phones?
The answer is yes to that. We have Deputy Commissioner Coulter on the line, who I think could give you some more specific details in response to that. Commissioner Coulter?
Yes, good afternoon. We had trained additional officers in anticipation of a possible work stoppage in the summer and made sure that we had people who were ready to go in the event of an emergency. Our first choice is always to use the dispatchers and leave our officers for the street, but there have been times that we moved people who are supervisors in to make them call takers, taking people off the console, and use trained officers. Our plan is to continue to train the officers with the hopes of not needing them, but making sure that they are ready to go and step in the event of an emergency, especially when we were hit in the past with significant numbers of people who were quarantined due to COVID or people who were out sick. So we have a plan B. We're always hoping to use our dispatchers and our call takers first, because they really are our first responders. They're highly trained and ready to go. But when we find that gap, we will use supervisors in the room or sworn personnel for the public safety emergency, but not for our regular day-to-day operations. Because we recognize that if we use them, we're pulling somebody else off the street where we also sorely need people.
And do you think that could also hurt, I think there's a little bit of mistrust right now, as Commissioner Allo alluded to, with the system, and people are afraid that if they call, they're not going to get someone on the line. But I think they also hope they're going to be speaking to a trained dispatcher, not necessarily a patrol officer that may not have the same training.
Right. The patrol officer would have been trained. He wouldn't be like we would pull somebody randomly off the street. They would have gone through the training, including the field training of practicing handling the calls. So their experience as a first responder would carry them through that. But they aren't the ideal person. The ideal person is the person that is higher in that regard. But we hope that people do learn to stay on the line, that they know that someone will call. And I've seen the improvements as I look at our response from the 911 aspect, not from the police responder, but in almost all the periods of the last couple of days, except for one, we have a goal to try to be 90% of our calls in 10 seconds. That's what we try to do at all times. So over the last couple of days, now that we've had these newly trained officers in there, they're at about 88, 89%. We're really starting to close that gap because there are 50 more people there to answer calls. Our goal is 90%, and truthfully would love to be 100%, but it's not realistic when major things happen somewhere in the city and multiple people call 911. But we would want the public to know that somebody will answer, hold on the line. That person will be trained, preferably one of our 911 call takers.
Thank you.
Kristen, you there?
Yeah, I didn't hear anything.
Oh, sorry. There you go.
Oh, did you say? Okay. Yeah, I didn't hear anything. I just figured I was next after Kelly. So I have two questions. One is when it comes to retail theft, like we've been hearing an increased number of stores, I guess you could say over the past several months or year, having real problems with retail theft. In the city, I know one day there was somebody who witnessed 3 different ones, including a guy with a duffel bag inside of a Rite Aid. The Rite Aid store owners were saying they can't, or the managers were saying they really can't do anything about it. They try and call police, but police kind of come out and say, well, this isn't going to get prosecuted. So I don't know if we should, we even can come out there. And we've also talked about staffing issues. So can you just kind of explain what I want to say police officers are supposed to be doing? Are they supposed to be going out? Are the store owners supposed to be calling, even though some of these retail thefts may not be taken to the level of prosecution?
So I can talk about that from the perspective of how we handle them as a department. The retail thefts, we will continue to process retail theft arrest as we've always done. The charges that the offenders are facing, it's not the same as what it had been in years past, which may be a reason that some of the owners, the stores are feeling frustrated. But if there is a retail theft arrest from a loss prevention officer or from a security person at any retail establishment, when the officers go out, they're obligated to take custody of that individual. They'll take them back to the detective division for where it occurred, and we'll process them. What happens as we process them is up to the district attorney's office. I do know that they have a policy where they're not, where they do have a monetary threshold. So this may be impacting some of the businesses on feeling that the cases aren't going forward as misdemeanors or felonies. They're being regraded into summary citations. I understand the district attorney's office may be looking at some things because of some concerns that have been expressed from the business owners and from some of the larger stores. But from the perspective of the police, the officer, nobody should be saying anything to anybody. We won't do anything with that. If there is an arrest to be made, we will make an arrest and we will process as we've always done. What happens post-processing by the police is up to the district attorney's office.
Okay. I think some of the complaints from the store owners or the managers is just that they, maybe it's also that they're bogged down with other things like shootings and whatnot. And so to put time and effort into looking, at tape and talking to the owners, or the managers, that may be, I guess, the issue.
So it's a challenge citywide. You've heard the commissioner and Deputy Commissioner Coulter talk about the challenges that we have with dealing with the violence and critical incidents out there. It does take away from our ability to respond to some of these, what are essentially lower priority calls. Retail theft isn't going to get the same priority as a shooting call, a homicide, a person with a gun. But we will be out there. We'll get the response. It may take a little while. And it may not be something that the store owners or the bigger stores may be feeling is adequate. But right now we are dealing with the challenges that we are facing, and we're doing the best we can with the resources that we have.
And then I just have one other question. I understand that this morning there were 2 different gropings at 15th and Market, and that somebody they believe it was one person, but they couldn't arrest them. They couldn't take them in because of some sort of policy or law. And then I understand that just a few hours later, the same man went and did it to another woman. And it sounds like we're calling it groping, but it was maybe worse than that, a little bit more violating. But can you just explain what happens there?
So I can just tell you, this was an egregious act. It is something that is horrible and for anybody to have to go through. I do understand that there were incidents that occurred outside of the presence of police officers. And in Pennsylvania, in Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, when a misdemeanor occurs outside of the presence of a police officer, except for certain offenses, we are obligated to submit the findings to the district attorney's office to get an arrest warrant. I think that's what was done with the earlier incidents. That person was identified. We were in the process of getting an arrest warrant. And subsequent to that, I understand that there was another incident where another groping type incident occurred. We have that person in custody, and we are working on getting that arrest through. We are needing the approval of the district attorney's office on the warrant to process him for these offenses, but he should be getting charged by the end of the day.
Okay, so that's more of a Pennsylvania law, as you said.
Yeah, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, a misdemeanor committed outside the presence of an officer is handled by arrest by warrant, except for in domestic incidents, DUI, or retail thefts.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Kristen. We'll now go to Anna Orso of the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Thanks, Kevin. Commissioner Outlaw, I'm curious about the rollout of the non-fatal shootings unit. I know it's sort of fledgling, but I'm wondering, what is your assessment of how that launch has gone thus far?
Ben, I'll go ahead and give that one to you.
Thank you. I didn't want to step on anybody. Anna, thanks for that question. Fledgling, I wouldn't use that word. I think it's been pretty really good. They went live on January the 31st, and they have been handling every non-fatal shooting. I can't say that our arrest clearance rate has skyrocketed through the roof. It's probably a little bit above where we would have been had they been handled outside in the divisions. I can tell you this, that the best part about having this centralized and coordinated is that every case is getting the attention that it really deserves. Now, that doesn't mean that every case is going to be cleared by an arrest. We face significant challenges on non-fatal shootings. And frankly, number one reason is because in a large number of them, we have resistance from the individual that is shot. That person is failing to tell us what happened or where it happened. And we're obligated to utilize and obtain evidence in other matters. And I'll talk about what happened yesterday in the area of Wyoming and D Street. A vehicle operating along Wyoming turned the corner and opened fire turned the corner onto D Street, opened fire. And frankly, we believe that there was an individual that was targeted, and bullets have no names and they just go where they go. And there was a 12-year-old young girl who was returning from school, walking home, who was struck by one of those projectiles. Fortunately, that bullet was not life-threatening to her. She's in stable conditions at St. Christopher, but it's a traumatic event for anybody to go through. The reason I mentioned that one in particular is because somebody showed up at a hospital later and was being less than truthful with investigators about what happened. But we have video evidence that puts that person at the location. And that happens more frequently than you could ever imagine. And that's the part of the challenge when people are struck by gunfire who are involved in activities that they don't want us to follow up on. So those are some of the challenges in non-fatal shootings. But this non-fatal shooting group will work that case nonstop, just like our homicide unit has. And that's going to be the advantage. And that's going to be why we're going to be able to clear more investigations with our centralized non-fatal shooting group.
And Anna, just really quick, I just want to hop in really quick too. And what's encouraging for me, I think it was last week or so, having the opportunity just to hear from a few of them, there's investment there. They understand the need for this type of work and the need for centralization. And so there's a clear understanding of what their roles are, how important and how valuable their work is. And you can see that in their efforts. I mean, we popped in on them while they were going through some training out at the lab. And you can see and hear the enthusiasm, not just on their faces and hear their voices. So for me, I think that's important because, we have to manage expectations and make it very clear that we might not win this within a month, but they're optimistic enough to recognize that, the work that they're doing is going to, put a huge dent in what we've been seeing over the last few years. So I just wanted to add that in there.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Building off of that, I'm curious, when you centralize a unit like this, is there any sort of concern about taking those detectives out of a geographic location where in the past they might have been focused on, say, the East Division, and having these detectives look citywide? How do you ensure that they maintain relationships with who they're policing, and And is there any concern there?
Yeah, I think that's something that we definitely had to consider. When you roll out something that's new, typically what we want to do is pilot it. And then we would, a lot of best practices, a lot of the things that we do, our efforts are focused on geographically based policing, right? But the reason why we wanted to, and I specifically said we need to bring everybody together, it doesn't mean that they're losing their geographic focus. It just means that we're coordinating all the resources so that everybody's in the same room or in the same area, so that they are communicating and that they do have access to all the same tools that our homicide detectives would have, as opposed to the investigations kind of being done piecemeal, in different parts of the city, in different divisions, and they may be prioritized in different ways depending on how they're categorized. So putting them under the same umbrella of leadership, basically make sure that there is a centralized focus, but you're still going to have detectives that are specialized in geographic parts of the city.
Thanks, Anna. We're going to have to move on because it was 2 questions. We're limited with time today. So we're going to move to Jamie, Telemundo 62.
Hello, good afternoon. I have 2 questions to whoever can answer, please. Also, we'll need translation to Spanish from Armando. The first question, right on Wyoming Avenue, Benham Street, within feet, there has been 2 shootings in less than 24 hours of a difference in between. One involving a 12-year-old around 3:30 p.m. on Tuesday, and one around 6 a.m. on Monday, reported as a double shooting. I talked to some neighbors that stated, and I quote, that there's illegal activity right on that corner happening every day. My question is if this kind of illegal activities are part of the police investigation in this area in North Philadelphia.
¿Me quisieras la pregunta interpretada al español?
Sí, por favor. La pregunta no, Armando, solo la respuesta.
Just the answer then. Go ahead.
So, Joel, I'll start by talking about the concern that we have in that area. And I can assure you that right now, while we can't connect those 2 incidents, we are concerned about the area. We do understand that it's having an impact on the neighborhood and the people that live in that area and work in that area. I'm not going to be speaking. Deputy Dales can jump on, but I know that we are going to add patrol resources and focus in that area. So I'll turn it over to Deputy Dales.
Yes, in addition to that, we will be concentrating on the narcotics issue. We received the information the other day that it was a narcotics issue in that particular zone. The captain, he definitely established a safety zone within that particular area, and Wyoming Avenue is one of those locations that we will be covering. So far, he's working on assigning a foot lead officer to patrol up and down the Wyoming Avenue corridor. And we also reached out to the family of the 12-year-old. A lot of you may not have known, but that 12-year-old was with an 8-year-old as well. So we want to make sure that they received the necessary trauma therapy as well as counseling. So we reached out to our community, CCIP staff to assist with providing resources for the two children.
La respuesta que nos da el comisionado Nash es que efectivamente esto es un área de preocupación para nosotros en la ciudad, aunque en este momento no hemos conectado esos 2 incidentes de tiroteos. Estamos conscientes del impacto que tiene en nuestros barrios, específicamente en esa área, para la gente que vive y trabaja ahí, y vamos a designar mayores recursos de patrulla para resolver este problema. El comisionado Gales nos dice de que efectivamente este es un tema de narcóticos, pero en este momento tenemos cierta información sobre lo que sucede en ese respecto en esa área, y vamos a establecer una zona de seguridad alrededor de la avenida Wyoming. También vamos a poner un oficial de patrulla que esté caminando por ahí, por el corredor que se da en la avenida Wyoming. Y tal vez la gente no lo sepa, pero nosotros hemos contactado a la familia de ese menor de 12 años de edad que estaba acompañado de otro menor de 8 años de edad para darles conserjería en vista del trauma que han sufrido gracias a los servicios de CCIP. Vamos a continuar patrullando y monitoreando esta situación, designando una mayor cantidad de recursos. Gracias.
My second question is if there is, what's the latest in the investigation where the 12-year-old was shot, if there's any arrest or any leads? Thank you.
So there are no arrests at this time. We have some direction. Our investigators have returned to the scene of that incident in an attempt to obtain any available video surveillance. And as anybody who's been on these press conferences know, I always talk about the importance of video in all of our investigations. In this one, it's going to be critical. We do have some information to go on regarding the vehicle that was involved. We're searching for that vehicle. And I am hopeful that we will eventually make some arrests in this case. These things are not going to happen overnight, but we will not stop until we arrest the person responsible for this terrible tragedy.
La respuesta a esta pregunta es que hasta este momento no se ha hecho ningún arresto para este incidente, pero tenemos ciertas pistas. Nuestros investigadores han vuelto a la escena del delito para buscar pruebas de video, grabación, y ustedes saben en estas conferencias de prensa lo importante que es contar con esta información de video. Es algo crítico, pero sin embargo sí tenemos la información sobre el vehículo que participó de este delito y lo estamos buscando. Mi esperanza es que podamos efectuar arrestos. Obviamente esto no va a suceder de la noche a la mañana, pero no vamos a detener nuestros esfuerzos para resolver este tema en particular. Gracias.
Thank you, everyone. Gracias.
Thanks, Jamie. Unfortunately, we are going to have to end at this time due to a hard stop. But if any reporters that do still have their hands up, they can always email press@phila.gov and we can make sure that we get answers to your questions. That concludes today's briefing. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Take care.